All right, Ryan, welcome to the show, man.
How you doing, man? Awesome. This is gonna be fun. Other side of the table.
Other side of the table. Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. It's awesome to finally connect. I've been aware of what you've been doing for the last couple of years from one of my clients or mutual client. His name's Corey, who runs a great business, Aviator Gear. He's actually been on the podcast before.
Nice.
And he's like, you got to talk to Ryan. Ryan's doing something really cool over at Arkona. It's very aligned with what you're doing. And so anyway, reached out, and I'm glad to finally get you on the podcast to learn a little bit more about it and share some of your wisdom about growing and potentially selling businesses and long-term value creation. So I'm excited. So welcome. And yeah, man, I want to kick it off with kind of an interest. Well, I wanted to hear from your side of the table. How did you get interested in helping business owners create more value in their business?
The short answer is I sold a family business that was doing about 20 million in revenue. And everybody thinks that you net 40 million when you sell a 20 million revenue business. And that's not the case. So it was this whole realization. My dad started it when I was a kid. He started in the 90s from the ground up. So I was part of the whole growth. You name the job in it. I was selling copiers. It was copiers, managed IT services, document management, B2B. And had a bunch of turnarounds. So there was a bunch of problems when I started full time, and then we helped turn around the business. So like from cash strap to turning around, building out the new products and services. I was running the business in my mid 20s and having just the time of my life, and ended up selling it for a variety of reasons that we can get into. Essentially I felt trapped, and so did my dad. It's the kind of the concept that we've landed on is like, I'm a visionary, and a lot of business owners are and entrepreneurs are. And my dad and I both had different visions realistically because we're different people, different ages, and we both want different things, which is super normal. And no matter what we did, we couldn't figure out how to align what we both wanted using the common vehicle of the business to accomplish everything that we wanted. And we felt trapped. Every, advisor or consultant or, whoever, all the advice made sense in a vacuum, but then we couldn't figure out how to piece it all together. So in order to get out of that trapped feeling that my dad had and I did, you sell the business, and then you go, I wish we wouldn't have done that because of all these things that most people are unaware of because you don't go through that every day. And so it's this panicked feeling of being trapped that made, dramatic decisions. If we would have known a bunch of things, we would have just been in more control. And I could have at least cleared a path to say, here's what I want. And I could articulate it and then actually build a path forward instead of just waking up at the beginning of every year, building out another plan to say, hey, next year is going to be the year.
Sure. I was listening to an episode with you and your business partner, Pat, and I think you ended the episode and you had a comment. You said, what does intentional mean to you? And Pat said something to the effect of making a decision based on having all the information and having all the context around what that means. So you can make a decision that is the decision that you actually want to make. And that was fascinating to me. And I wholeheartedly agree with that. Because from my side of the table, when I'm working with entrepreneurs, often, they're growing really quickly in their business. And it's all about how do we continue to grow? How do we, like you've gone through this scrappy period where you're making money for the first time, you've got product market fit, and now it's starting to grow. And it can be overwhelming to think about, what does this actually even mean, right? Like what is our goal? What is the end in mind? When should business owners start thinking about what they're going to do with their company? And then on the flip side of that is, when do they actually think about it typically?
Okay. So I'm going to try and pull from a couple of stories and analogies for this. So business is a game, right? There's rules, whether you know them or not, there's just rules behind it. If you were to walk on a football field, would you want that game to end at some point? Like you wouldn't want to like have this open-ended, like, when is this thing going to end? And I think, this whole, like, concept of selling a business is actually, you asked me a question right before we started. One thing that would be crazy not to ask me, and I think I just kind of connected the dots here, is I ran into this problem, Austin, for literally like 5 years after we sold, because we sold in 2014. And I was kind of promoting this whole exit thing. And then there's been this huge boom of exit planning, which most of it's bullshit. There's this drive towards these advisors to tell people to talk about the exit. Well, it's mainly because the baby boomers are retiring and this whole wave. But the reality is the word exit, that every business owner has a visceral reaction to it. Like they don't want to sell unless you're funded by VC or you get some money where the point is to give the money back to other people with more of a return, right? Like that's the point. But for a lot of entrepreneurs that started it, you never think about it because it's about solving a problem in the industry. You saw an opportunity or you wanted to quit your job or financial freedom or make an impact or change an industry. There's usually this internal motivation to start the business. And then you've got revenue and cost and profit. And then you're on the train, like you just said, right? You're just grinding away and you don't really know the rules. You're on that football field, not understanding when that game or how it could all unfold and really what the rules are. You're learning play to play. So long answer to, if you understand the right rules and what creates value, wouldn't you want to do that from the very beginning? If you're going to put all your money and all your time and energy and sacrifice into something, don't you want to do that, have something more than a job at the end of the day? That's what you want. So why don't you know how all of it works to begin with, so you can funnel that time, money, and energy into something that will create you financial freedom or an impact or the fun that you want, instead of just waking up, which I see almost all the time. Someone wakes up, Austin, second part of your question, and they're just tired or something's off. They're not making as much money as they want because growth is expensive, or they're burnt out from dealing with the drama, or they're not making the impact that they want. And so they look up and they're going, what am I supposed to do? And then they realize that, if I would have now to do what I'm supposed to do, it's going to be a longer period of time and I don't have the time or energy to do it anymore. And that's just a huge bummer and market inefficiencies, to be honest. So understanding the rules is evaluations of what creates value, I think, is the most important thing anybody can understand.
Well, I want to get a little bit more clear on this, because you've talked about the difference on some of your other podcasts that I was listening to about what's the difference between annual income and long-term value. I think those are an interesting concept to tackle, and why specifically is maximizing annual income not always the goal.
Great question. And then, so the episode you're talking about is shifting your mindset. And that's the biggest thing that anybody should do. If they're listening in, the one thing you should do is shift your mindset to understand this concept. Because if you're solving for annual income, what I mean by that, Austin, is most times you talk to a business owner, again, these are not VC backed or, investor backed. These are solo entrepreneurs, maybe a partner or two. How much money can we take out of the business? Right? I did this to create money and I want to make money. So what's my K1 going to be? Mitigate taxes, run shit through the company, and make a big salary or less salary to optimize your distributions. But they're solving for the end of the year. And what happens is you could be suffocating the company from investment, right? So if let's say, just take some hypothetical numbers to kind of weave throughout this episode. Let's say you had a business doing $500,000 in EBITDA, or just cash flow, just basic number, $500,000 in cash flow. You're going to have to pay your taxes on that. Then you're going to figure out, okay, Austin, how much do you want to take home this year and how much do you want to reinvest? Right? It's just a very specific question. Most people haven't really dissected that like that. If you plan on pulling all 400 grand out after your taxes, how are you going to fund the next employee, the next CRM, or the automation campaign, or buying inventory, or all those things when you took all the money to buy stuff or save? Right? So there's this whole, you're using the same resources for two different reasons, and being aware of that, then it kind of to follow the long-term value creation. If you're optimizing for annual income, your decisions are going to be made to not really invest, right? You're going to be, every decision that comes through your lens is going to be, well, I can't buy that, or I'm not going to take more money home, versus going, hey, if I take that 400 grand and I reinvest it into the business, let's say $500,000, it's worth a multiple of 4. So $4 million, or I'm sorry, $2 million. if I reinvest that $500,000 this next year and do systems, hire people, do a couple other things, automate my sales process, I can maybe increase that multiple to a 4.5, right? So now you're talking about growing the value of your asset long-term.
Isn't it? So I think that the challenge that most people have with that is actually visualizing what they can do to invest, right? It's much easier to visualize taking home $500,000 in distributions versus like a future earning on multiple. Mm-hmm. What are some of the best ways that people can kind of like visualize how an investment might be able to help them increase long-term value? I mean, one of the things you mentioned, I thought was that I see all the time is employees, right? How might hiring somebody, or what are some things people can do to change their mindset around investing and something that might maybe make their business more valuable in the future?
One phrase in 3 words: the more sustainable, predictable, and transferable your cash flow is, the more it's worth. Period. So what you're doing should be making your cash flow more sustainable, predictable, and transferable. If it's not doing that, there should be a really good reason why you're doing that. Otherwise, take the distribution. So with that, like if you think about, let's say you had your business and I wanted to buy it. If I want to take that $500,000 and I want that $500,000, I'm going to pay you for that investment. Well, if I want to take it and everything is generated from you, well, that's a job. Well, let's say you start to realize systems and processes and technology, or all the different things that could make that more transferable, are just ways to make that more valuable. So that way I can grab that $500,000 and do what I want with that investment. So it's just, and there's 8 functional areas, and we don't have to get into some of the specifics unless you want to, but understanding what makes that sustainable, transferable, and predictable is another exercise. But I think just the concept is easy to understand.
No, I think that's an easy way to describe it. And it's also why when I have work with clients that have businesses that are successful and they're working really, really hard, often my advice for an upcoming year is, all right, we need to have you take off more time and have the business grow. And that's the best thing possible for the business.
100%, man. 100%.
Because nobody wants to buy a business where you are working 14 hours a day, everything's tied up with you, there's no systems, all these different things. And that can be hard, especially as you grow and maybe the business kind of gets away from you and it's like it's growing as faster than you can keep up.
I was gonna say I want to add one thing to that kind of train of thought is, then another question is, well, why is someone going to do this, right? And I think that's the biggest challenge. And we started off the whole podcast with, I think context provides clarity, so much clarity, understanding the rules of the game, which in this is just what creates value, right? If you don't understand what creates value, you're not going to do it. And not only understanding it, but then being able to see it. Like if I do those investments of the $400,000 into the company, show me that it's going to create the value. Well, I'm never going to see it because I don't know if I'm going to harvest it. I never know when I'm going to sell it. So there's this blindness to like, I'm never going to transfer this company at some point. And by the way, it could be just holding it and keeping it as a passive investor. That's an option too. But there's no way of harvesting that value that you're creating if you don't understand it, right? So it's like with your house, as you slowly do things over the years, you're making it more marketable, but you don't get to see that return until you sell it. Which is, it's the same kind of concept. So I think to make it not only the concepts of making it more sustainable, predictable, and transferable, but then also being able to measure, because professional investors, and we're going to talk about how we can do this in the financials, that anybody can do this. You track in your financials and you can project out the value of your business. So you can get like a baseline today. And then as you're growing it and making it, de-risking that cash flow, you can literally track and measure the value of the company without selling it. So you have a reason of why you want to do those investments. You get excited to invest because you can see what it's doing.
So let's dive into that. How would somebody get started in tracking the value of their company without like preparing to sell?
So it's understanding valuations, and then understanding what your company's worth today. You got to start somewhere, right? And I think that's the big key part. And depending on the industry, I know there's a lot, the e-com space that you play in, there's brokers all over the place. You can get either a free valuation or there's some other ways you can get some kind of, they call it an indication of value. So you're getting professionals to say, hey, here's what it's worth. And that could become anywhere between free and call it $6-7 grand. So you have a baseline, and then you can interject it, like literally integrate that into your forecast of your company, of your P&L, your balance sheet, and your cash flow statement. You can literally see out like, oh my God, I'm going to take this many distributions over the next 5 years. This is going to be my revenue growth, my EBITDA growth, the multiple growth, the value growth, and how much your net proceeds would, like if you sold it, some assumptions with transaction costs to see what it's truly worth to you net. You put that into your financials and your forecasts. And we can talk about more about valuations if you want, but there's a way to understand what valuations going in there and how they came to that. But I'd say that's the easiest way is you start with point A and then you use that to project it out.
So I get this question a lot, and this could be a challenging question because it is a challenging question for me. What is a good valuation? And what is a good valuation, and how do you think about answering that question?
So, I totally agree with you that it is, up until I've gone through this 7-year journey, there's way too much noise, Austin, and it's unnecessary noise. Fair market, book value, this or that, or multiple, like it's all loosey-goosey and just mystical until something actually happens. So everybody ignores it. And you're usually getting answers from technical people that have never ran businesses. So then, entrepreneurs ignore them, hence us sitting on this show. So let me know if you think that this concept makes sense, because this is part of our training. But there are two ways to think about valuations. There are transactional, and then there's the intrinsic value and transactional value. So what I mean by intrinsic value, Austin, is that there is a value of your cash flow based on the risk. It's called the discounted cash flow. Don't have to get into that, but they're essentially saying of that $500,000, what's the risk? What's the risk that it's going to be here at the end of this year and then next year and the year after that? And then they place a risk on it. It's just like a cap rate in real estate, but they say, hey, based on the risk, this is the higher percentage, the lower the value of the company is. And so that, Austin, can absolutely be measured no matter what while you currently have your company based on the financials and assessing the risk of your operations. So that's what gets plugged into those financials, like I told you, because you can measure that without selling your business. All negotiations of every single sale of a company starts there, no matter what. Professional buyers start there. And the reason I bucket the other example into transaction value is it's the intrinsic value of that asset, the value of the business, but there's either a premium or a discount put onto it based on the purpose of the deal that that individual buyer is placing on that deal, right? Sure. So if I think about it, let's say $500,000 for multiple, $2 million. So now we've got this, maybe that's the intrinsic value based on the risk of the cash flow. Now let's say I have a complementary business that could take your customer base, scale it. I might say, hey, I'm willing to pay $3 million because I know that I can have an insane ROI based on my numbers by buying this asset. So the transaction value is $3 million, but the true intrinsic value of that cash flow was $2 million. The opposite end, and then I want to hear your feedback, is the opposite end of that is tons of family businesses that I work with. Some are very wealthy and they don't want the liquidation event from their company. So then what you can do using the IRS tax code is actually discount the company by 35% using lack of control and lack of liquidity. And so you're actually discounting the value and then gifting it to the kids using an estate plan. But it started at the $2 million because it's just math. Like you can't argue with the math.
Sure. No, that's really interesting. And I would love to dive into, so when you're looking at the risk, the cash flow risk, what are some factors that people don't often think about that professional investors or professional buyers look at as risk, like additional risk to the cash that they may be able to take in from buying the business?
So there's a lot of ways, there's a lot of systems that are trying to better articulate this question that you just proposed. John Warlow's The Value Builder System is one. It's a way of kind of getting you to think differently. There's some concepts there, but it's not as actionable in my opinion as some of the other like mechanical things that a private equity firm would do.
Sure.
There's one that I stumbled across called the value opportunity profile. It's really meaty, but the concepts are there are 8 functional areas of a company: sales, marketing, leadership, finance, legal, planning. And every business in every industry of every size has these functions. It's like an engine. Like you have it all to generate the cash. So there's a way of assessing like, hey, in your sales, is it just Austin hustling, or is there a system, a process with data that you can prove that it's sustainable, predictable, and transferable? So it's kind of assessing these different areas and then saying, hey, where am I weak? If I'm really good at sales and marketing, this is literally exactly what happened to my dad and I. We topped out at 21 million because we were a sales machine, 22 salespeople, cold calling, just grinding away. Our finance department and our operations, our ERP system, all these things didn't allow for more growth because we couldn't get the data, couldn't make decisions. We weren't mature enough. So you naturally get stunted if all of those things aren't level and continue to go up at the same time.
Makes sense. Makes sense. I mean, back to the risk profile. It's all of what you're talking about. It's whether it's sustainable, repeatable, and transferable. Those are all like the less your business matches up with those things, there's more risk for some sort of an investor or somebody purchasing.
Yeah, think about if you were to give an example of a business, you just go, okay, like what are the problems that I'm going to see? And by the way, this is where the game, if you're going back to the sports analogy, is like, if you're walking on the football field, you don't know the game, you don't know the rules. And by the way, you're walking onto the field in the Super Bowl and the other people study the game, study the opponents, they know what they're doing. And you're a college athlete that's just naturally skilled. It's about so the business buyer is going to look at your operations, assess those things. Like, hey, Austin, why don't you send me over your org chart? Send me over your, I'm going to be looking at turn rate. Austin can't keep anybody hired. Like he sucks as a leader. Or show me your financials. Yeah. And if it's your tax returns, I'm going, this guy doesn't know what he's doing. Which, by the way, if you got a really good business, I start salivating because I go, this guy doesn't know what he wants or doesn't know what he has. So I'm going to pay $1 million and I know it's probably worth $3 million. And I'm going to use your cash flow to reinvest the things that you didn't do so I can make the $3 million.
Can you talk about the J curve concept? Because I think
we're listening to that podcast, so
that connects quite well with the concept in private equity. So, what is the J curve? And first, maybe explain that for people who aren't familiar with the term, and how does that work from a buyer's perspective, and how can you leverage it as a current business owner?
Mm-hmm. So let's just to keep the theme going. Let's say it's the $500,000 again in cash flow.
Yep.
Let's say it's you and your business. And I'm looking, okay, if I want to buy your business, then if I see your numbers, because as a buyer, I'm going to look at all your financials and I'm going to say, look at Austin's been taking home $400,000. I'm sure he's got quite a lifestyle, but look at doesn't have systems, doesn't have process. I'm looking at the opportunity that you're missing because you want to buy stuff for your life. And I'm going, hey, so I'm going to buy your business now, not for the $3 million that it could be worth if you were doing those things, but it's probably worth $1.5 million. I'm going to take the $400,000. I'll probably finance some of it. So let's say I've got, I don't know, out of the $500,000, pay some tax. Let's say it's $200,000 in debt. So now I've got, call it a couple $100,000 to reinvest in the company because I don't want to go buy boats that you were buying. So I'm going to take the money that's available to hire all the things to de-risk the cash flow. So we call it burning EBITDA. So you're going to spend that money for probably the first 12 to 18 months. And then within 24 months, I could have a company worth $3 million because I didn't need it for the lifestyle and I was willing to reinvest it.
Sure. Makes sense. It's like, but I think that's the challenge, right? That's the challenge with articulating what is an investment versus what is not an investment, right? Yeah. And
sorry, go ahead.
I was just interested to hear, like, in your experience when you work with business owners, what are some of the areas that are just like generally overlooked investment areas that, people will come to you and they'll be like, listen, I want to sell my business. And you're like, well, you're not going to get, after looking at it, you might not get what you want because you haven't invested in these areas. Are there anything that kind of typically pops up?
Yeah. And before I answer that, I think I'll potentially hit it with this answer. I want to go back to, because I don't think I completed the answer of if you currently own a company. So we talked about the J curve from a buyer, but I think understanding it as a current business owner before we get into that second question of like, how do I what's overlooked?
Yeah.
Is so if you have that business, if you're paying yourself, whether it's 80 grand or 150 grand, whatever it is,
Yeah.
that's what you need to pay your bills with. Like that's your paycheck for the job that you're doing in your business that you should get paid to do. That's different than your equity, which is the value that you hold of the owner. Separate that stuff right now. So you can do that as you own your company. What ends up happening, we call it the lifestyle creep, right? Like your lifestyle, like in this situation that we're talking about, if you started to think about this, you go, I'm only paying myself 100 grand, but my lifestyle is 200 because I need those distributions. The moment you need the distributions above and beyond your salary is the moment that you have an opportunity that a buyer would probably take, right? So there's that overlap. So by separating this and saying, okay, I need to now figure out how to not rely on the distributions potentially. And by the way, this is not right or wrong. It's just about understanding what you want. So once you can articulate that and separate it, then you say, okay, now what do I still want to take those distributions, or do I want to reinvest? Like, how am I effectively using that cash flow for the right reasons based on my goals that I have as an individual and as an entrepreneur? Then we can get to the question. You say, okay, well, what's often overlooked? One of my best friends from college, he just bought his family business, and it's in a bunch of traditional space. So he makes a bunch of money, and he's literally my best friend. He cannot wrap his head around. I'm like, dude, you need to hire a GM. Like, he is solving for annual income loss. And I'm just like, dude, it's going to cost you 120 grand, probably $30,000 recruiter fee. And like, you can spend time thinking about how to deploy the extra cash into value creating activities. You're the bottleneck for this stuff. So that next level team is something that I think people wait so long to do because it's literally coming right out of their pocket. So I think the team and then a bunch of other systems and stuff like that.
I definitely feel you on the team. And I think even from a smaller business perspective, this all ladders up, right? I feel like you got to start early on in your business thinking this way. If you want to continue, as the business grows, if you want to be in a position where 5 years down the road, your business in it is like, you're mentally prepared for the decision that needs to be made to replace yourself with like a president or something like that. Mm-hmm. Or replace yourself, hire a CEO. I have a couple of friends who've hired CEOs relatively early on in their business journey, and both of them say it was the best decision that they ever made. They're like, we weren't ready. I wasn't ready to be that person. I loved my business and I still like working at the business, but we got a CEO in there who's taking over some of the stuff that we're not good at. Mm-hmm. Long-term thinking, not short-term thinking.
100%, man. And by the way, like, and I don't know, and it's so interesting. I think I think age impacts people's receptivity to this, because like I work a lot with baby boomers and also a lot with young entrepreneurs, and like young entrepreneurs are the first to go, hey, I don't want to be the everything to this. And so a lot of the older generations, like, I am the owner and I'm the head honcho, and there's a lot more ego.
It's identity. Yeah.
100%, man. Like, this is me. I'm the business owner. So that becomes a big barrier. And I think that has more to do with the people reaching out to you. If they reach out to you early on, they're probably of a different mindset than when they're 60 years old after running the business for their whole life. Oh, totally. And I think, I don't know where I was going with that. Yeah, I apologize.
Well, no. I think what we were talking about was like making decisions early on in the business that lead to like long-term thinking. Like if you can start replacing yourself early, that's good habits that help the business down the road.
Well, and I think, so I'll use Arcona, our business, as a legit example of this. So yeah, even though Pat and I have bought and sold our own companies and stuff like that, and Pat's different age than me, so he's got more wealth than I do. And the reality is, we're not just investing everything into Arkona. Like, we're making our own intentional decisions based on the concepts we apply. Arkona started up 2 years ago. We built out all of our budgets, all of our strategic plans for exactly the things that we teach. There's a couple less zeros in most of our clients, but it's still the same concepts. And our target by the end of this year, Austin, is we want to have a certain amount of cash flow coming from other activities so we have more leverage, and we have 50% of our time to do other activities Q1 2022. So like all of our plans are about creating leverage and then hiring people to create that leverage and have that cash flow where we're not responsible for delivering that cash flow. So like anybody that's listening in can do the exact same thing to say, hey, at what point can I get to the point where I'm investing in this and I can still meet my personal income needs? So you can start to snowball that cash flow into value creating activities.
So can you dive into that a little bit more? I think it's a really interesting example and one that a lot of people will connect with. So you're talking about your goal for this year. You said it's to create other activities that generate income. Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That are not tied to us. So like if you think if we're separating ownership and management roles, right?
Yes.
So Pat is spending 30 hours a week doing fractional CFO roles for our clients that go through the training. We also, Pat and I do our trainings. So we get paid. We have guaranteed payments out of our S Corp for the job that we are doing, which is sales and marketing for me, and then also doing coaching and training, and same thing with Pat. There's a lot of trading dollars and hours for that. Training is more leverageable. And then we're hiring on additional CFOs, which provides additional income where we're not doing that work. So we're hiring people that eats into our margin, but it's creating leverage of cash flow. So the target is, Austin, by the end of this year, if we can have 50% of our time available to ownership level strategies of deploying capital inside our own business, that's how, and it starts from zero. We had zero revenue in 2018 and it goes up like that.
And that is huge. And that is the mindset. That is the mindset shift. It's like, I think the way you articulated it, getting to ownership level is really powerful because that allows people to recognize that the time they spend, I'll give the flip side, e-commerce example, the time they spend running Facebook ads 100%. And being that person doing the Facebook ads day in and day out takes them away from the ownership level activities that they could be doing and figuring out where to deploy capital in the business to have like massive breakthroughs. The Facebook breakthroughs are important. It's important to have somebody who's really good, who can run your advertising and for you to be able to grow really fast with that advertising. But the next level is solving two things at the same time. You're going to be able to grow faster, and also it unlocks more long-term value, which is the big concept that you've been talking about. And what's so interesting about running a business, regardless if you want to sell it or not, right? And this is so why should people focus on this if they run a business that they don't plan to sell?
There's no wrong answer. That's the beauty of this. Once you understand this, it's your choice. I think the best thing anybody can do is understand this, because then they make a decision. The worst thing anybody can experience is what I call purgatory. It's no decision. It's sucking the money out of the company, expecting it to be worth $3 million and being burnt out because you're working 80 hours a week. It's like, who the heck wants that? And
you don't want to get trapped. That's a terrible experience to be in.
And by the way, and this does not discriminate numbers. So like I've got, e-commerce people or entrepreneurs that I've worked with, like literally generating 1 to 2 million in EBITDA. And there's 2 people. And I'm like, that's a job, dude. You're literally like a day trader. Like you've hacked Amazon, Amazon and Facebook ads, but like you have no company. And like, if you want, like you have a lot of cash flow to reinvest, I will gladly pay you $1 million and reinvest 800 grand to create a company. But like, if that individual looked to me, Austin, and said, I don't want that. I don't want the drama. I don't want the headaches. And I would say, great, then don't spend that money on all the noise that all your peers are telling you should spend the money on. Go buy an island. Like it's your choice, but
yes,
the expectations aren't that this thing will be worth $10 million. Does that make sense?
It's back to the beginning when I was talking about what the definition of intentional is. It's having an understanding of all the different options, right? One of the things I've heard you and Pat talk about on the podcast, which I thought was interesting, was there are 2 general scenarios, right? There's 2 general scenarios that people might find themselves in. And I'll speak from the scenario that I find my clients run into most often, which is they get burnt out, right? They're doing too much. They get burnt out and they're like, you know what? I'm just thinking about selling this thing. I just want to I want to move on. I'm just done. What are some of the options that they have that they might not even know are possible?
You talking about exit options?
Well, exit options, right? Because I was listening to you and Pat talk about this. It's like that's a really tough spot to be in where you're like, I'm just done. I'm tired. But I think the response that you had was like, done from what? Like, what is it?
That's kind of what I was getting at just now. Is like, I don't even know how to answer because I don't even know what you're referring to. And that's exactly the problem. If I had $1 for every single time an entrepreneur and business owner said to me, I want out in 5 years, I'm like, out of what? Like, what are you talking about? Your job, your role, your responsibility, the financial investment. Like, I literally do not know what you mean by that. And they're like, huh. And this is why we also joke it's the rolling 5 years. Everybody wants out in 5 years. And I'm like,
yes.
The opposing scenarios could be, what if I were to tell you, Austin, when you say out and we kind of unpack it and you're like, oh, you're actually just burnt out with your job. Well, you have the cash flow to hire someone to alleviate yourself from the day-to-day responsibilities. And okay, that's one option. That's just still owning the company, but we're solving for the paycheck.
And it may solve the issue.
Right.
That's so interesting, right? That's something that like you can solve the issue and still be in a position to have an exit later down the road where your business continues to get more valuable.
But think about why that's not possible for most people is so like, let's say someone said to you, Austin, why I can't do that. And then I would go, okay, well, why? Usually
I've got massive bills.
100%. So what happens is they've conflated ownership and distributions and salary. So like in that situation, you probably have some sort of, lifestyle creep where they need every penny from the business, which allows them to not be able to afford, or which makes them not be able to afford that hire. So then it's like, well, let's plan to hire yourself out first, create more options again. And a couple other layers of that would be, you could literally sell some of your company, like tap the financial investment, but keep running the strategic vision of your company. There's ESOPs, partnership buyouts, minority stakes. There's so many things to say, hey, you know what? I'd really like to just take $1 million off the table and keep running my company. That's one thing. Or I want completely out of my financial investment. There are some other people where like they've sold, they don't have any of the management responsibilities, but like if you have like half of it, that's going to be rolled equity or an earnout, and you literally do not want to think about your industry or business anymore, and you don't even want to think about that financial investment and how it's doing in that industry, that's a thing too. So we just have to really understand, what does out mean? Yeah.
No, I think that's a great question to ask. And it's not intuitive because, so I had a conversation with a guy who's been on the podcast. He came on. His name's Griffin Thal. He sold Pure Vita bracelets for like $100 million. And we were talking about it. And he was like, I'd had dinner with him and a couple other guys like 1.5 years, maybe 2 years before they sold the business. And it wasn't really on his radar. And afterwards, we were talking about it, and he's like, the thing that's so interesting is like, going into this, I had no concept of what it was like to sell a business. I just thought like businesses IPO'd. I thought that was how I thought that. Like when I started it, I thought they just IPO'd. It's like, but no, it took like an entire year of getting through financials, going through this whole process to find talk to different buyers. They went on a road show. And then at the end, they had a really successful exit, but it took a long time. What should business owners know about the sale process, the exit process that isn't talked about that much?
I think just the pure amount of options that you have. And this is where I created 5 principles years ago, because I love taking the world of complexity and making it simple. I grew up as a copier sales guy, man. I was not an accountant, right? And here I am talking about all this stuff, and literally finance was my worst degree or worst grade in college. And once you understand this, it's like the Matrix where you see the zeros and ones and you just get it. And so when you look at the options, like that comment that you made about that gentleman, people usually think it's IPO or it's a strategic sale, because they actually intellectually get it. They're like, oh, well, these people, if they bolted me on, I mean, how many times you heard that? This would make a ton of sense. Or some sort of internal management buyout. Like that's kind of the extent of it. But like the combinations that you could have of private equity, there's various kinds, family offices. I mean, so many different things that if you separate and you say, okay, what do I want? So these 5 principles, like, what do you want from your life? Like truly,
Sure.
like, let's build that. And so like, what does that look like? Then you understand the second principle is your financial targets, kind of some of the stuff we've been talking about. Then the third principle is your exit options. So essentially you have this idea of how your role could evolve with all these exits, as well as your equity and how each of those paths would be impacted different on the different exit options. And then you layer that on principle 1 and 2 and say, okay, how does this exit impact what I want and my financials? Oh, that doesn't make any sense. X-nay it. You know what I mean? So you're kind of doing this process of elimination. And that's why the first 3 principles go in order, because the 4th principle is grow value. So if you know what you're trying to accomplish, then invest in the company with what you're trying to find. And so like just the pure amount of options, Austin, is just mind boggling. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, no, it is. And it's not something that's being taught. It's not something that you can go, entrepreneurship is kind of a learn by doing skill. And so a lot of the stuff you learn by going through the process of selling a business, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You can, if you have a little bit of guidance early on, then your strategic plan goes from 1 year to 5 year. And you start thinking, okay, well, at the beginning of this year, we probably should start accomplishing some of these things to hit our goal and work our way in. And that's one of the things I really respect about working with Corey from Aviator Gear. Like he was thinking, let's make decisions today that invest in the business so that in 3-4 years from now, we have maximum value. And that's a huge mindset shift, and just cool to see people go through that.
So I want to put a bow on a lot of these topics so you think about a plan, and what's in every owner's control is what they're investing in and the strategic plan of their business. So if you can say, okay, principle 1, this is what I want. Principle 2, you say, okay, here's the income. There's 3 targets. What's my target annual income? What's my outside net worth? And how does that impact my decisions? And then it's the value of the business. So going back to intrinsic and transactional value, because we haven't sold the business yet, we can't understand the transactional value because there's no purpose of the deal yet, right? So now all we have to do is measure the risk of the cash flow. Well, the beauty part is the number one thing that's going to impact that valuation is the risk. So you can focus on de-risking it. And if you can hit your financial freedom number while you own your company based on the intrinsic value of your business, you now have like literally unlimited options, because you could the reason that's important is because an SBA loan is going to be valued based on the intrinsic value. A partnership buyout is going to be valued based on an intrinsic value. An ESOP is going to be based on the financial intrinsic value. So most of any of those could be plan B, and you know that you just totally have options. And if all of a sudden someone comes out of the woodwork and offers you an insane amount, and you say, well, here's what I want, here are the terms and conditions, because I already know that I'm free. And so going back to your story is like, if you project out and you're watching this, you don't even have to make a decision on what exit you want to do ever until you hit that number. And then you go, now it's just choices.
Now it's options. It's options. I'm excited. You're coming into the coalition to do a training, and you're going to talk a little bit about about long-term value, creating long-term value. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you're going to be covering and what people can expect? So members of the coalition, obviously they can have access. If not, you can come join and get access to this. But what are you going to be covering? Because I'm excited about it.
So we're going to cover a little bit about the 5 principles just to kind of frame it all up. Then we're going to dive into how to use your financials to clarify that this path towards a more valuable business. So this literally, Austin, we didn't invent any of this. This is best practices, and we're going to show how to use your financials right now, what good looks like, and then how to look into the past data to give insights to the future, and then what a good projection looks like. Because essentially, if you think about it, the forward projections of like, hey, my 5-year plan, this is what I want to accomplish. You need to have it all set up correctly and what the trends look like. And then you can trust the data going forward. And then we're going to use a case study to show how all this works. And so it's going to be a nice dialogue broken out, and I think the thing that what we want for every entrepreneur is that this doesn't have to be intimidating. Austin, I went through 3 CFOs before selling our business. And I remember, I was in my early 20s and I used to sit there feeling dumb, everybody talking over me. They're all wearing suits. They're all older than me. And I'm going, shouldn't be this complicated. I just don't understand. Why do I have to be an expert to get this? And our goal is that we can eliminate that fear of this. Is like, hey man, like everybody's in the same boat and everybody needs to understand this. And like, I think the problem is a lot of advisors have never ran a business, so they don't know how to speak like entrepreneurs, right? Like, what does this really mean to me? So the goal is to kind of actually show some of the stuff that we've been talking about.
Cool. Awesome. Ryan, this has been fantastic. You also host a podcast, the Intentional Growth Podcast, right?
That is correct.
And you've been running it for how long? You got over 200 episodes, right?
132, man.
232 episodes. Kudos to you for that, because it's hard to run a podcast for a long period of time. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on. Was you've got some excellent interviews over there. What's the best place for them if somebody wants to go and listen to that and go find out more about you? Where would you direct them?
Any of the normal podcast platforms. Intentional Growth is the name of the show. Arkona.io is our website. We got ultimate guides on there, and all the podcasts and additional show notes and all that stuff is on the website. Easiest place to find me is LinkedIn. Super
awesome.
accessible there. That's how you guys found me.
It is. Ryan, thanks so much, man. And appreciate the work that you're doing. And I think it's the right stuff to help business owners make a bigger impact and achieve what people are actually looking for, which I think is, wealth and fulfillment. So thanks so much. And I will talk to you later.